Right now in Havana, people are literally cooking their dinners out in the streets with charcoal because there is just absolutely zero diesel left on the island.
Yeah, it's a completely unprecedented energy collapse.
Right. And then meanwhile, you look 1,000 miles away in Washington, and the multi-trillion-dollar bond market is, well, it's practically an open revolt against the incoming Federal Reserve chair. And the guy hasn't even finished unpacking his boxes yet.
It's a massive recalibration. I mean, the systems we've relied on for decades are, suddenly short-circuiting all at the same time.
They really are. Well, hello, and a really warm welcome to all of you tuning in right now. You are watching NovaStream, your 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and we are so glad you're here with us.
Absolutely.
Whether you're keeping a close eye on our live crypto markets, checking out the real-time price tracking for BTC, ETH, and SOL, or monitoring the global financial indices tracking the S&P 500, NASDAQ, Q4X, and commodities, or, hey, maybe you're just following our auto-curated breaking news feed. We have you covered.
We do, and there is a lot breaking today.
Today's mission is simple. We are taking this massive stack of fast-moving global sources and bringing you the highlights of the day.
And I gotta say, it is quite a stack today. The underlying mechanics of the global system are just shifting so rapidly. And if you don't understand the why behind these headlines, it honestly can look like total chaos.
Yeah, totally. We have a huge amount of ground to cover for you. We're going to look at that preemptive bond market revolt, some massive Bitcoin ETF outflows, truly shocking military pullbacks in Europe, and sweeping domestic policy shifts impacting everything from immigration enforcement to the Supreme Court.
It's a lot to process.
It is. Think of the global economy and the geopolitical landscape like this massive interconnected climate control system. And right now, the wiring itself is being ripped out and replaced while the machine is still running.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it. And I'd say the first wire we need to inspect is the one connecting inflation to the Federal Reserve.
Okay, let's unpack this. The U.S. Senate just confirmed Kevin Warsh to succeed Jerome Powell as the new Fed chair. Tight vote, 54-45.
Right.
And we saw Warsh resign from Kupang's board to comply with federal ethics rules so he could step into this role. But here is the problem. Consumer prices are accelerating at 3.8%.
Yeah, which is sticky, very sticky.
Right. And so the bond market is just preemptively spiking. We're seeing 2-year yields jump over 4%, and the 30-year yields are breaching 5%. To use an analogy here, it's like the bond market is the crowd at a concert, and the Fed is the security guard.
Sure.
If the crowd sees a fire in this case, that sticky 3.8% inflation, and they start stampeding for the exits by dumping bonds and driving up yields, it really doesn't matter what the security guard was planning to do, The crowd has already dictated the reality of the room.
What's fascinating here is the sheer irony of his arrival. I mean, Warsh was nominated with this broad market expectation that he would deliver rate cuts to stimulate the economy.
Yeah, everyone thought cuts were coming.
Exactly. But instead, he is facing an absolute baptism by fire. Because the bond market is selling off, those yields are surging. And when yields surge, well, borrowing just gets more expensive across the entire economy.
Mortgages, business loans, everything.
Everything. Right now, markets are actually pricing in a 30% chance of a rate hike by early December.
Wait, a hike? I thought the whole narrative was that we were easing up.
That was the narrative. But the data, specifically that 3.8% inflation print and oil prices sitting stubbornly above $100 a barrel, it just destroyed that narrative.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the bond vigilantes are pushing the entire yield curve higher. This completely erodes the policy space Warsh was expected to have. I mean, he has talked about a regime change at the Fed, right?
Yeah.
Shifting the focus entirely away from climate and DEI initiatives to concentrate purely on managing inflation and shrinking the balance sheet.
But you can't exactly dictate the terms of a regime change when the market is forcing your hand on day one.
Exactly. It makes implementing strategy incredibly difficult.
It makes sense. If government bonds, which are, considered a risk-free investment, are suddenly paying out 4 or 5%, that acts like financial gravity. It pulls money right out of riskier investments.
Yep. The capital just rotates out.
Which brings us to the logical ripple effect, our tech and crypto markets.
Yeah.
If you look at our NovaStream indices today, the S&P 500 is flashing a new sell signal. The sources are pointing out that market breadth is weakening. But for our listeners who aren't, day trading options, what does that actually look like in practice?
So think of market breadth like the foundation of a house. If the S&P 500 index is going up, well, the house looks sturdy from the street.
Right.
But market breadth measures how many individual stocks within that index are actually participating in the rally. If only a handful of massive tech companies are going up and the other 490 companies are going down, your breadth is incredibly weak.
So the foundation is cracking, even if the roof looks great.
You got it.
And right now, that roof is basically just NVIDIA. We have record-setting earnings expectations from them, but as you said, the foundation underneath is crumbling because of those high interest rates. And that gravity is hitting crypto incredibly hard.
It really is.
We watched Bitcoin drop into the $79,300 range following a massive single-day outflow from U.S. spot ETFs. We are talking $630.4 million leaving in one single day.
Massive numbers. BlackRock's IBIT fund alone lost $373 million.
Right. And over 5 days, total redemptions hit $1.26 billion. But I have to push back here for a second because I'm looking at these ETF outflows. $1 billion leaves, and my first instinct is just absolute panic.
Sure, that's natural.
But Bitcoin was still hovering near $80,000 when this exodus started. Are institutional investors actually panicking about inflation, or are they just looking at their screens and deciding to cash in their chips at the top of a rally? So what does this all mean?
The data strongly suggests your second instinct is the correct one. It's profit-taking. Because these ETF outflows happened while Bitcoin was still trading at a position of historical strength, analysts do not view this as a forced, panic-driven liquidation.
All right.
When an institution redeems their ETF shares, the fund managers are forced to sell the underlying Bitcoin to pay them out. The big players are looking at the exact same bond yields we just discussed, seeing those hawkish Fed signals, and just deciding to take their massive gains off the table.
So the smart money is just rebalancing. If we look at the downside then, where does the floor sit?
Well, analysts see strong long-term holder support right around the $65,000 mark. And there's actually a fascinating contrarian view in the historical data you should consider.
Oh, what's that?
If you look back in March and April of 2026, massive ETF outflows actually acted as a buy signal.
Wait, really? A buy signal?
Yeah. It cleared out the weak hands, preceded a short shakeout, and then led to a massive subsequent rally. The mechanics of the market often dictate that when the most obvious sellers are exhausted, the only path left is up.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Speaking of the tension between automated trading and real-world consequences, one of the portfolios buying into this concentrated tech market belongs to the President of the United States.
Yes, that made waves today.
And this is happening right ahead of a major diplomatic trip to Asia.
The recent financial disclosures are quite revealing, especially when you examine the friction between modern algorithmic trading and, traditional statecraft.
The scale of this disclosure is just wild. It spans over 100 pages, detailing more than 3,000 individual transactions.
It's a massive document.
Yeah, and it shows President Trump bought between $1 million and $5 million in both NVIDIA and Boeing shares in the first quarter of 2026, while simultaneously selling off major holdings in Meta and Amazon. And the timing is what has everyone talking.
Right, because this happened right as NVIDIA's CEO joined the U.S. delegation to China seeking chip export approvals.
Exactly. And Boeing was over there aiming for major aircraft contracts.
The historical context of these diplomatic trade missions is really critical to understand here. Why is the U.S. delegating corporate CEOs to negotiate in Beijing? Because historically, the leverage just hasn't worked.
How far back does that go?
According to the sources, U.S. presidents dating all the way back to Ronald Reagan in 1984 have attempted to convert engagement with Beijing into economic leverage, and they have almost always come up empty-handed.
Wow, 1984.
Yeah, Reagan believed that opening trade and introducing market reforms would naturally move China toward an American-style democratic capitalism. The mechanism he banked on was that economic freedom would demand political freedom.
Which, obviously, looking at the last 40 years, absolutely did not materialize.
No, it didn't.
But let's look at the mechanics of these specific stock purchases, because the optics are definitely generating intense discussion. How does a sitting president trade millions in individual stocks involving companies that are actively part of his diplomatic delegation without, violating conflict of interest norms?
So this is where the White House defense comes in, and it highlights a uniquely modern problem.
Okay.
The administration emphasizes that these trades are not executed by the president sitting at a laptop on E-Trade.
Right. He's not day trading.
Exactly.
Bro.
They are handled entirely by independent third-party managers using computer-based automated portfolios. It is algorithmic. The stated goal of these blind trusts is to completely distance the executive from any direct decision-making.
It's a fascinating collision of worlds. I mean, you have this historical reality that U.S. trade leverage in China rarely works, bumping right up against a modern reality where a computer algorithm, which is completely blind to the optics of statecraft, is actively buying up shares of the very companies the government is trying to secure deals for.
It creates an undeniable tension between automated financial systems and geopolitical strategy.
And while the U.S. is trying to figure out its economic leverage in Asia, we are simultaneously seeing the administration drastically recalibrate how it uses its leverage in other parts of the world. It's a geopolitical seesaw.
That's a good word for it.
The underlying logic seems to be, if a region isn't paying off, cut it. If an adversary is vulnerable, squeeze them.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see a very deliberate shift in how the United States approaches power. They are completely altering the mechanics of foreign presence.
Let's look at Europe first, because this is massive change in posture. The Pentagon abruptly canceled the deployment of 4,000 troops to Poland. This is the Blackjack Brigade out of Texas.
Right.
They had already held their farewell ceremonies, their equipment was already in transit, advanced personnel were literally on the ground in Europe, and they were ordered to turn around and return home immediately, halting Operation Atlantic Resolve.
You really have to ask why you would execute such an abrupt mid-air turnaround.
Yeah, what's driving that?
The sources point to two main drivers. First, there is severe diplomatic friction with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz over the direction of regional peace negotiations.
Okay, that's the political side.
Right. But the secondary, perhaps more structural reason is domestic. The U.S. Army is facing a massive $4 to $6 billion budget shortfall.
Ah, so they are just doing the math.
Yes. The administration is using that budget shortfall as a catalyst to accelerate the withdrawal of troops, basically reducing the European footprint down to pre-2022 levels.
That's significant.
It is. The overarching strategic goal here is to force European allies to finally shoulder their own conventional defense burdens. Now, Warsaw has downplayed the immediate threat, noting they still have 10,000 U.S. troops rotating through, but military experts are warning that Western Europe must adapt quickly. The mechanism of American power in Europe is changing from a permanent shield to an optional conditional asset.
But then you look at Cuba, and the approach is the exact opposite. The pressure is at absolute maximum capacity. CIA Director John Ratcliffe just traveled to Havana to meet with Raulito, that's Raul Castro's grandson, and the Interior Minister.
Yeah.
And the conditions on the ground there are just apocalyptic. Like we mentioned at the top of the show, Cuba is suffering 20 to 22-hour daily blackouts. They have zero diesel. People are cooking with charcoal in the streets. How did it get this bad so fast?
Because the U.S. found the island's geopolitical weak point and squeezed it. That energy crisis is not an accident. It is directly tied to U.S. policy mechanics.
In what way?
The administration sees Venezuela's oil industry. Venezuela was Cuba's main benefactor. By cutting off that pipeline and subsequently imposing a strict blockade on foreign oil reaching the island, the U.S. engineered a localized collapse.
Wow. It is a multi-pronged approach then. Because while the CIA director is on the ground in Havana, presumably offering a way out of the darkness, federal prosecutors in Miami are simultaneously preparing drug trafficking indictments against the elder Raul Castro.
Potentially involving the 1996 downing of the brothers to the rescue planes, yes.
Right.
It is a textbook example of maximum pressure. You remove the military umbrella in Europe to force allies to pay up, while you apply coordinated diplomatic, economic, and legal pressure on a nearby adversary to force submission.
And that philosophy of aggressive recalibration, this idea of pulling up the floorboards and questioning old agreements, isn't just happening abroad. It is being applied right here at home, specifically within the bureaucratic mechanics of domestic immigration policy.
This is a major domestic story today.
Yeah, the Department of Homeland Security's Tactical Operations Division has created what they are calling an LPR removal apparatus. LPR stands for Lawful Permanent Resident People with Green Cards.
This represents a massive shift in bureaucratic philosophy. Let's explain how this usually works. Historically, a green card holder's file is reactive.
Meaning they only look at it if you ask them to.
Exactly. It is typically only reviewed when that person actively applies for renewal or attempts to naturalize as a citizen. If they committed a crime, it gets caught then.
But this new apparatus changes that entirely.
Correct. This new unit is proactive. They have dedicated a team of officers specifically to comb through the existing records of lawful permanent residents to actively seek out deportable offenses.
And the internal data shows they've reviewed about 2,890 cases so far. 80% of those required no further action, but the administration is seeking to deport at least 50 lawful permanent residents.
And USCIS argues that this targets individuals convicted of severe crimes.
Right. Things like sexual assault, DUI, or, in one specific case, illicitly obtaining tech for Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The administration's stance is that this apparatus is necessary to fix historically lax screening standards.
But the friction comes from the allocation of resources. Critics and former Homeland Security officials point out that dedicating a highly specialized tactical unit to aggressively hunt through the files of people who already possess legal status is incredibly inefficient.
Especially considering the agency currently have an 11 million pending application backlog.
Exactly. Deporting a green card holder for drug trafficking or murder isn't a new concept in U.S. law. But the sheer existence of a proactive removal apparatus is provoking intense fear among longtime residents who suddenly feel the ground shifting under their feet.
And these sweeping administrative actions, this total reevaluation of who we are and what the rules should be, are triggering massive ideological battles over America's identity. We're seeing this play out simultaneously on the National Mall and inside the highest court in the land.
Two very different arenas for the same cultural debate.
Let's start on the mall. On May 17th, there is a 9-hour Christian prayer festival called Rededicate 250, scheduled right in the heart of Washington. It's organized by a public-private partnership called Freedom 250, aiming to celebrate the nation's 250th birthday.
And the level of official involvement is what elevates this from a simple gathering to a major constitutional debate. The lineup features high-ranking government officials acting in their official capacities.
Yeah, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and a recorded message from President Trump.
The organizers are very clear about their mechanics here. The goal is to symbolically rededicate the United States to God, featuring imagery like George Washington praying at Valley Forge.
But critics, including constitutional advocates and several Democratic lawmakers, are pushing back hard. They are labeling this Christian nationalism, arguing it explicitly alienates non-Christian citizens. They were raising serious Establishment Clause concerns.
Which is a fundamental legal debate.
Right. So for our listeners who haven't taken a constitutional law class recently, what is the core of that legal argument?
The Establishment Clause is the part of the First Amendment that dictates the government cannot establish an official religion or unduly favor one religion over another. Critics argue that utilizing the National Mall, which is a public space funded partially by taxpayer dollars, and featuring the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State headlining a sectarian Christian prayer event, well, they argue it crosses the line from private religious expression into state-sponsored religious endorsement.
But the administration sees it differently.
The administration is utilizing the historical momentum of the 250th anniversary to firmly push a narrative centered on America's Christian origins.
It is a very public, very physical declaration of national values, but at the exact same time, we have the Supreme Court locked in an incredibly complex tug-of-war over national values and states' rights.
The mifepristone case.
Yes. The Supreme Court just issued a temporary order allowing the abortion pill mifepristone to continue to be sent through the federal mail while a case out of the Fifth Circuit in Louisiana proceeds.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this raises an important question about the legal fallout of overturning Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs decision. When the court returned abortion legislation to the states, it created a massive jurisdictional collision. Louisiana, which generally bans abortion, is arguing that the FDA's decision to allow mifepristone to be mailed directly to patients actively injures their state sovereignty.
Because they can't stop the mail.
Exactly. The mechanics of their argument is that they literally cannot enforce their own state laws if the Federal Postal Service is bypassing them. They also point to the financial burden of Medicaid dollars spent on emergency room care for complications.
The drug manufacturers, though Danco and GenBioPro fought back, arguing Louisiana doesn't even have the legal standing to sue. They claim it's an attenuated theory, basically identical to the one the Supreme Court already rejected in 2024 from a group of doctors.
And the majority of the court agreed to let the mail continue for now.
But the ruling wasn't unanimous. Justices Thomas and Alito both dissented, and their arguments show just how deep the fractures go.
Yes. Justice Thomas argued that shipping these drugs directly violates the Comstock Act.
Wait, the Comstock Act, that's from, what, the 1870s?
1873, to be precise. It is a 150-year-old law originally designed to ban the mailing of obscene, lewd, or lascivious materials, which explicitly included any drugs or devices related to abortion.
That's still on the books.
It has been largely dormant for a century, but yes, it is still legally on the books. Thomas referred to the companies mailing these pills as a criminal enterprise. Meanwhile, Justice Alito argued that the FDA's mail order rules were specifically engineered to undermine the Dobbs decision.
Interesting.
He noted the mechanics of shield laws in liberal states, which ensure doctors face no consequences for mailing pills into conservative states with bans.
The juxtaposition is wild. We have lawmakers celebrating the nation's birthday through a specifically religious lens in a massive public festival, while the judicial system is locked in this intense battle over whether federal mail services override state-level abortion bans.
It is a profound debate over federalism, state sovereignty, and the moral identity of the nation.
And it is happening across all branches of government simultaneously. It is heavy stuff.
Pretty heavy.
But I want to bring the conversation back down to earth as we wrap up today. Because while courts and markets debate billions of dollars, and politicians debate the soul of the nation, you, the listener, are feeling the friction of all this in your own wallet.
Absolutely.
We started out talking about $630 million in Bitcoin ETF outflows and surging bond yields, but the most accurate economic indicator for the average person right now might actually be an all-you-can-eat shrimp deal at Red Lobster.
It is a surprisingly brilliant barometer for the mechanics of the consumer economy.
It really is. Inflation is tightening household budgets. The cost of eating out has risen 3.6% over the past year. And the mechanism of the restaurant industry is simple. If you don't have foot traffic, you die.
Right.
To drive that traffic, mid-tier chains like Red Lobster and Applebee's are being forced to bring back massive all-you-can-eat deals just to get people through the door. They have to slash their own profit margins to maintain sales volume.
But at the exact same time, you have a completely different reality playing out in luxury markets.
Exactly. StubHub executives are on earnings calls talking about the upcoming North American World Cup. The cheapest tickets to see the U.S. team are running around $1,640.
Wow.
And premium seats are selling for $10,000. Yet, StubHub admits even the World Cup won't match the massive economic impact of Taylor Swift's Eras Tour.
This perfectly illustrates the economic bifurcation we're seeing in the data right now. You essentially have two different economies operating in the exact same country.
Yeah.
On one end, the market can still completely support ultra-premium luxury spending. A certain segment of the population is completely insulated from that 3.8% inflation and will gladly pay $10,000 for a soccer ticket.
But on the other end?
On the other end, the foundation of the retail economy is showing deep cracks. Discretionary income for the average family is so squeezed that restaurants have to essentially give away food to keep the lights on.
Well, we have certainly covered the highlights of the day. From the bond market effectively taking the steering wheel before the new Fed chair even sits down, to crypto ETFs seeing major profit-taking.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We've tracked the mechanics of military transport planes turning around midair in Europe while the energy grid collapses in Cuba, examined the proactive new apparatus reviewing green cards, and looked at the massive ideological battles over federalism on the National Mall and in the Supreme Court, and of course the bifurcated cost of dining out.
The sheer volume of shifting paradigms is staggering, and it leaves us with a vital question to consider.
What's that?
When algorithmic trusts manage presidential portfolios, when bond markets dictate central bank policy before the ink is even dry on a confirmation, and when global security is repriced and recalibrated overnight, what happens to the average citizen when all the traditional rules of the global system are rewritten in real time?
That is the question of the hour. We are going to leave you to mull that one over. Think about that air conditioning running full blast while the repairman is still pulling into the driveway. Thank you so much for tuning in to these highlights of the day. You are watching NovaStream. We want to encourage you to keep watching our 24/7 feed for the very next breaking update. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.